The rain didn't stop for 3 days. Aneesa stayed mostly indoors, watching sheets of water pour down from the thatched roof, pooling in the soil outside like small mirrors. The jungle changed when it rained like this, quieter, suspended, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She spent her time grinding turmeric roots, hanging new bundles of lemongrass to dry, and trying not to think about how long it had been since she last heard a voice other than her own. Her hands worked from memory, but her mind wandered. Always back to that one night, the flash of claws, the scream that wasn't hers, the silence that followed. She hadn't dared to go near the southern trail since. The forest, she'd decided, could live without her. But that evening, the stillness broke. A sound cut through the rain. Not loud, but wrong. Too short to be thunder. Too wet to be wind. A cry. Aneesa froze, fingers clutching the edge of her clay bowl. It came again. Soft. Desperate. Her body moved before her thoughts caught up. She grabbed the lantern, her old poncho, and stepped out barefoot into the mud. The path was barely a trail now, washed into suggestion by the downpour. Still, her feet knew the way. The call tugged her forward, between the banyan roots and ferns swollen with water. Then, just beyond the edge of the medicinal grove, she saw it. A small shape slumped under a fig tree, covered in mud, trembling. At first she thought it was a boulder, until it shifted slightly and released a weak trumpet. A baby elephant. Alone. Its ears were limp, one bleeding. A gash ran across its flank, and its small body heaved with every breath. Aneesa's hands trembled. She didn't move closer. Not yet, because something in the air changed. The forest had gone quiet again. Too quiet. She turned slowly, scanning the undergrowth. That's when she saw the eyes, low to the ground, golden and still. 1, 2, then 3. Answers. Not one, but a loose circle of them, emerging from the wet shadows. A rare sight in itself. More than one jaguar hunting together was nearly unheard of in this forest. They weren't looking at her. Not yet. They were watching the calf. Aneesa knew the rules of the wild. She had once written papers on predator behavior, mapped attack patterns. But nothing about this moment was rational. She could feel her breath shortening. Her instinct screamed, "Leave, back away. Let the forest handle its own." But something deeper kept her still. She remembered the feeling of a small hand slipping from hers years ago. The helplessness, the cold shock of absence. And now, here was another small life, alone, in danger. Aneesa dropped to her knees in the mud beside the calf. She placed her body between it and the jaguars, without understanding why. Her voice, rough from disuse, barely came out. "I'm here," she whispered to the calf. "I don't know why, but I'm here." The jaguars inched forward, slowly, coordinated. And then, a sound tore through the forest, deep, thunderous, impossible to mistake. A second trumpet, from the other side of the grove. Something moved between the trees, tall, wide, ancient. A wild bull elephant emerged from the mist, alone. He wasn't part of the usual herds Aneesa had observed. His ears were torn, his tusks cracked and uneven. His skin bore the pale scars of past battles. And yet, he was calm. He looked at Aneesa, then at the calf, then at the jaguars. He didn't charge, he didn't roar. He simply stepped forward and placed his massive body between them and the baby. The jaguars stopped. There was a moment, an impossible, suspended moment, where predator, prey, woman and giant all shared the same breath. Then, slowly, the jaguars faded back into the brush. The elephant didn't move. He stood over the calf, and by extension, over Aneesa, a guardian, a sentinel. And for the first time in years, Aneesa felt something break inside her, not in pain, but in awe. Something ancient had answered her call, and stayed. The rain softened to a mist as the night deepened. Aneesa sat motionless beside the calf, her knees soaked, hands resting gently on the animal's warm, trembling skin. The bull elephant, this silent guardian, remained just behind them, not close enough to touch, but close enough to protect. She could hear his breathing, steady, calm, like a heartbeat against the chaos of the jungle. For a long time, no one moved. Even the forest seemed to pause, as if unsure of what had just occurred. The calf let out a faint wheezing sound, its trunk twitching toward her hand. Aneesa leaned in. The wound on its side was shallow but infected. She could smell the fever in its breath. It needed care, and fast. Her body ached with adrenaline, but her hands found purpose. Slowly, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small cloth soaked in a bitter paste she'd made from neem and turmeric. She had used it for years on her own scars. Now she gently pressed it against the calf's flank. To her surprise, the animal didn't flinch. Instead, it closed its eyes. A soft rumble escaped from its chest, like a sigh. Aneesa blinked away tears. "Balo," she whispered, almost without thinking. "Little brave one." It wasn't a name she had planned, but it felt right. Behind her, the bull elephant let out a deep exhale. A low, vibrating sound, not angry, not loud, as if acknowledging the moment. She turned slowly. He was watching her, not like a wild animal measuring threat, but like something older, deeper, almost human. The mist thickened around them, and in that haze of breath and light, Aneesa saw something she would remember for the rest of her life. The bull lowered his head, just slightly, enough to let a single drop of water fall from his trunk onto the ground near her knee. Then he stepped back and vanished into the trees. She was alone again, at least in body, but the silence no longer felt like a cage. She spent the rest of the night tending to Balo, tearing old sheets to wrap the wounds, mixing crushed herbs with warm water from her flask, humming, without realizing, the lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her when she was sick. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through the canopy in long golden beams. Birds chirped cautiously, testing the new day. Aneesa fashioned a sling from vines and old netting to help Balo walk. He wobbled, but stood. His ears perked slightly at her voice. She led him slowly toward her cabin, down the mossy trail. And when they reached the clearing, she stopped. Because there, just at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the light, was the bull, waiting. Aneesa didn't speak. She only nodded. And once more, he turned and walked away, but not without looking back. That morning, with mud still on her hands and sleep crusted in her eyes, Aneesa realized something had shifted. Inside her, around her. The forest was no longer something she feared. It had chosen her again. Balo took to the clearing slowly. Each step was an effort, but his tiny feet pressed with intention into the earth, like he understood that this place meant survival. Aneesa walked beside him, one hand always hovering, never forcing, just presence, just trust. The cabin came into view, a small structure of wood and woven leaves, perched at the edge of the jungle like a forgotten storybook page. No walls to hold secrets, just space enough for healing. Aneesa cleared the corner of the porch and laid out dry blankets. She mixed more of her healing paste and boiled water with leaves known to draw out fever. As she worked, Balo watched her, occasionally reaching with his trunk toward the steam. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in years. She wrote. Not a report, not research, just a note. His name is Balo. He didn't cry when the jaguars came, and neither did I. The pen shook in her hand, but the words came steady, as if someone else were guiding them. She kept writing, about the feel of his skin, the curve of his ears, the rhythm of his breath when he slept. The pages turned quickly. By the third day, Balo was stronger. He followed her movements. He nuzzled her arm when she stopped to rest. He even dipped his feet in the water basin outside the cabin and splashed, sending droplets across the porch. Aneesa laughed, an honest sound that startled even the birds nearby. But she still hadn't spoken aloud, not since that night. And then, on the fifth morning, it happened. She had stepped just beyond the clearing to gather more herbs. The mist was thick, and the sounds of the jungle hummed like a distant song. When she returned, Balo was gone. Her heart cracked in an instant. She called out without meaning to, her voice hoarse, unused. "Balo!" Silence, then a sound, leaves cracking. She turned sharply, and there he was. But not alone. The bull elephant stood beside him, and behind them, a shape moved through the trees. Tara, the matriarch. Her enormous form emerged from the shadows like a memory too heavy to carry. Her eyes scanned Aneesa, then dropped to Balo. She let out a low, guttural sound, a call, a recognition. Balo froze. His ears twitched. He looked back at Aneesa, then toward his mother. Aneesa knelt. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She only whispered, barely audible. "It's okay. and Palo moved. He walked to Tara slowly. She wrapped her trunk around him and pulled him into her side. But then, something she never expected. The bull elephant turned and walked, not toward the herd, but toward Aneesa. He stopped just feet away, and for the first time, lowered his trunk, not in warning, not in caution, but in offering. He touched her arm, just once, and then turned back into the trees. No one spoke. No one moved for a long time. The jungle held its breath. Aneesa stood and watched as the herd disappeared into the morning mist. She thought she would collapse from the emptiness. But when she turned back toward her porch, there was something waiting. A pile of leaves, carefully placed in the shape of a circle, and on top, one single feather, white, weightless, proof that the forest sees everything, and sometimes answers. The days that followed were quiet, not the kind of silence that bites, but the kind that wraps softly around the bones. Aneesa returned to her routines, gathering herbs, drying roots, boiling teas. But her movements were different now, lighter, as if a piece of her had been lifted out of the dark and gently returned to her chest. She didn't expect to see them again. Elephants don't circle back, the textbooks always said, especially not the wild bulls, especially not the ones who had nothing left to prove. But Remora had never followed rules, and neither did Vayu. It began with the rustle of ferns just before sunrise, then the sound of water shifting near the edge of the ravine, and finally, footprints, not from a herd, just one. Large, defined, unmistakable. She followed them, barefoot, barely breathing, and there he was, standing at the edge of the fog, Vayu, alone, not in pain, not lost, just present. He didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. Aneesa walked slowly across the wet grass until the space between them narrowed. Then she stopped and sat down, cross-legged, like she used to when observing primates years ago, back when she still believed in connection. The air was still, the world listened, and Vayu lay down, right there beside her, an impossible gesture, a surrender. The weight of it filled her lungs like a prayer. For an hour they stayed like that, not touching, not commanding, just two living things, breathing in rhythm, the same space, the same earth, the same ache. She wrote that night, pages and pages, but this time, not about Palo, not about the jaguars, not about the danger or the fear. She wrote about peace, the rare kind, the kind that doesn't arrive with answers, but with presence, the kind that doesn't need to speak, only stay. And Vayu did. He came back every few days, never at the same time, never with warning. He would linger in the shadow of the clearing, his body half lit by the filtered light through the canopy. He never took food, never moved past the boundary between forest and home. He just appeared, and somehow, that was enough. The villagers noticed. They began calling her the one the forest got. Some even left offerings outside her gate, bundles of dried berries, hand-carved stones, feathers woven into twine. But Aneesa didn't speak to them. She didn't have to. She had already said what mattered, to herself, to the wind, to Vayu, that sometimes what saves us is not the roar. It's the echo of something staying when it could have left, and choosing not to. The rain had fallen all night, thin and steady, like the quiet pulse of something waiting. Aneesa didn't sleep. She felt it, that edge in the air, that ache in the trees, the kind of pressure that builds just before a shift. She sat by the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching the path between the trees where Vayu sometimes appeared. But that morning, he didn't come alone. From the mist emerged his silhouette first, tall, weathered, familiar. But behind him, almost hidden between the hanging vines and mist-drenched leaves, was another, Palo, the little one, no longer as frail, but still smaller than she remembered, and slower. His trunk dragged slightly, still marked by old scars, but his eyes, they held something new, something steady. Aneesa stepped outside without thinking. The forest greeted her with a hush. She walked barefoot again, the ground soaked and cold beneath her feet, until she stood a breath away from them. Vayu's head dipped slightly. Not a bow, not a command, but something close to permission. And Palo, slowly, tentatively, stepped forward. Just one step, and then another, until his forehead rested lightly against Aneesa's chest. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just closed her eyes and exhaled. A breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. Her hand moved instinctively to his temple, fingers brushing the soft curve behind his eye. No fear, no flinch, only recognition. And in that fragile moment, something broke open inside her, but not in a way that hurt. It was release. Vayu turned then, slowly, and disappeared back into the trees. He left Barlow there, with her. Aneesa didn't ask why. The forest didn't need reasons. She prepared a shelter from fallen palms, created a shallow pool with cool water, ground herbs into poultices. She didn't speak, only moved. And Barlow stayed. Not as a pet, not as a possession, but as a presence. Day after day, Aneesa watched the wild in him soften, not vanish, but shift. He would wander, explore, return, sleep near her window, trumpet softly at dusk. And once, just once, she saw him place his trunk against a tree in the clearing and pause, as if remembering something too large for his own body. It was there that she saw the scar again, the one just below his left ear, where the jaguar's claw had struck. She touched it one evening. Barlow didn't move away. And in that moment, she knew, some wounds don't ask to be healed. They just ask to be seen. The season shifted again. The winds that once carried storms now returned with a gentle warmth. The vines grew thicker, the sun came earlier, and the forest floor no longer held the scent of danger, only renewal. Barlow had grown, not by much, but enough that Aneesa could see the rhythm in his stride change. He no longer stumbled over roots or paused at every rustle. He moved with quiet awareness, still childlike in curiosity, but steadier now, surer. And Aneesa, she had changed too. Her journal, once dusty and untouched, was now filled with pages, not of data, but of memories, not of numbers, but of textures. She wrote about the way Barlow exhaled when he slept, about the echo of Vayu's presence in the trees, about the silence, not as something empty, but as something holy. Then came the morning she knew. The leaves were still damp from the night's dew. A string of her dried herbs had fallen from the window. Barlow stood at the edge of the clearing, not near, but not far, watching, waiting. The manada had returned. She heard them before she saw them. A low, distant rumble, branches shifting, earth softening. And then, like ghosts emerging from mist, the elephants appeared through the trees. Tara was among them, majestic, whole. Her eyes searched until they found him. Barlow didn't rush to meet them. He turned first to Aneesa. He stepped close, gently, and lowered his head. She understood. Without words, she stepped forward with a small pouch in her hand, a satchel made of woven reed, filled with dried leaves, and a single stone she'd kept since the night he'd almost died. She tied it carefully to a thin rope and placed it over his neck, letting it rest behind his ear. A small weight, a quiet memory. He lifted his trunk and touched her heart. A soft press, no sound, and then he turned. He walked toward his mother, who stepped forward to meet him. The manada opened space, a space he filled. But before they disappeared into the forest, Barlow paused one last time. He turned his head, just slightly, as if to imprint her face one last time. Aneesa didn't wave, she only smiled. And that smile, that broken, healed, imperfect smile, was more than enough. That night, as she sat on the step of her cabin, a soft breeze blew in from the east. And there, on the wooden railing, sat something strange, a stone, smooth, perfectly round, still damp. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Then, for the first time in years, she spoke out loud, to the trees, to the wind, to the soul of the forest. Some creatures don't just survive the wild, they carry others out of it too.